On this week's episode, we talk damnation. We explore the what-ifs of Mr. Jack Mort, and we discuss why we might not need to remember but forget the face of our Father. Welcome to Dark Tower YouTube. This is a special Tower Junkies only episode. Welcome, my Tower Junkie friends. We love the Dark Tower series, and we've read it at least once. We know how it ends, and we've come back for more because there's so much here to relearn and re-explore and re-figure out. So make sure you've finished the series before watching this video. Otherwise, we'll spoil the whole thing for you. So read it and then come back. We'd love to see you here. Okay, that leaves us Tower Junkies alone, and we could have the big people talk. By the way, this is Dark Tower YouTube. I am Michelle McEwen, your host, and here we're exploring the magic, the mystery, and the metaphysics of Stephen King's magnum opus, The Dark Tower. I think you knew that, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But just to be clear what's going on, we're talking about the drawing of the three. We read through that book, analyzed the crap out of everything going on in there in our regular book club episodes. And then we did a Dark Tower drawing of the three roundup. And that's just an episode where we're looking at the book as a whole and saying what happened in this book in relation to the gunslinger. In this episode, we'll talk a little bit about what happened in this book in relation to the series as a whole. But go watch that roundup episode. It's called The Drawing of the Three Themes, Characters, Plots, something like that. It's in the Dark Tower Book Club, Drawing of the Three Book Club section. Okay, here we go. I want to think about the end of book one leading into book two, and just pointing out how the very end of that book, Jake says the infamous line, "Go then, there are other worlds than these." And isn't it funny how we open up book two jumping into those other worlds very quickly? So I think that's a nice transition from book one to book two. A few of these things are not particularly spoilery, but I just ran out of time to talk about them on the roundup book as a whole episode, so just keep that in mind. But something I wanted to point out were the similarities between book one, The Gunslinger, and book two, The Drawing of the Three. They begin and end in similar ways. Both books begin in the sand and end in some kind of green lushness. Now, of course, in The Gunslinger, Roland moves back to the Golgotha, the sand, but then ends up on the beach. So close enough for government work, as King likes to say. Both feature that Golgotha. So at the end of book one, Roland is in the Golgotha. The place of the skull is what that means with the man in black. And at the end of The Drawing of the Three, Detta Walker is in her own Golgotha of sorts. And I believe that word is used. Don't quote me on that, but it is a place of bones. That's where she's kind of hiding out, watching Eddie and Roland down on the beach. Both of these books feature Roland on the verge of death. At the beginning of each of these books, he's just about dying or dead and about to encounter a character that saves his life. There is a blood sacrifice at the beginning of both of these stories. Roland in book one, The Gunslinger, he falls and cuts his hand, and there's a lot of attention drawn to the bleeding, the blood falling onto the sand, which just sucks it up like it was never even there to begin with because the sand is so thirsty. And in book two, of course, the Lobstrosities get his fingers and he's bleeding heavily into the sand on the beach. We noticed in The Gunslinger how, or maybe we noticed in this book, I don't remember, but I'm going to say it again. Both times that happened, the portal to the new character who's able to save his life occurs. The next thing occurs. So maybe something little in there about the idea of blood sacrifice, the idea of sacrifice leading to your next steps. It's not huge. The idea of sacrifice is huge in this series. So I feel like the idea of blood sacrifice, Roland's own self-sacrifice, could be something that we look at there and say, self-sacrifice leading to the next steps, not him sacrificing other characters. Roland. In both books, we find Roland considering what happens if he becomes a monster on his way to the tower. And knowing that if that happens, all is lost, that he cannot end up at the tower as a monster. So that's a pretty big theme in both books. I would say more in this one. King kind of pulls that idea out. Both books end with a sacrifice of other characters. In the first book, we sacrifice Jake, and in the second book, we sacrifice Jack. Coincidence that those names are so similar? We talked a little bit about that in the book club episode. I don't think so. In the first sacrifice of Jake, this is totally selfish. And Roland is like, I love this kid, but I'm gonna have to let him die to get to the man in black, to get to the Dark Tower. When he sacrifices Jack, it's to save Susanna in order that he can get to the tower with her. It's a little better though, I think. It's not 100% selfish, that sacrifice in the second book. There is a thought of somebody else and what they need, even if Roland is still thinking about, I need her as a gunslinger to get to the tower. But I give him a lot of brownie points in the drawing of the three for just breaking out a little bit of his mold from the gunslinger. This is one where it's not the gunslinger and the drawing of the three. It's the drawing of the three and the Dark Tower. So both books end with a scene of Roland and Susanna cleaning a deer. So it's the epilogue, I believe, to the drawing of the three, where he's trying to clean the deer and she comes in and has to help him because his hand is no good anymore. And he's like, I'll teach you how to do this. Funny how at the end of the Dark Tower, the same thing is happening and they're having to make warm clothes because they're crossing that awful, treacherous, cold wasteland. The difference between these two books is where we end up. So at the end of The Gunslinger, we're told that Roland's hands find the rocky, lighted lip of damnation. And we know this is directly after dropping Jake, and so we can say dropping Jake and damnation, those things go hand in hand. We're going to talk a little bit more about damnation because that's a big deal in this book and in the cycle as a whole. But so he drops Jake, finds his rocky lighted lip of damnation, and then at the end of that book, he's hanging out with the man in black. That's who he's spending the very final chapter of that book with, before, of course, he's on his own at the very end. And then at the end of the drawing of the three, he sacrifices Jack, and instead he is not hanging out with Man in Black, but he's hanging out with his new quartet. He saved Susanna and he's spending time with them, and we see him kind of happy, satisfied for the first time, perhaps in the whole series, really. So that's some similarities between those two books and a little bit of differences. What did I miss? Because I know they're there. Next, let's talk about things that hit differently. So when you're reading the drawing of the three for the second time or the fifth time or the 55th time, and you read certain things, you go, damn, that fits the series as a whole, doesn't it? So here's a sentence that jumped out at me this reading. And this is where Roland's walking up the beach to find the first door. King writes, "He walked out of nowhere toward nowhere. A man from another time who, it seemed, had reached a point of pointless ending." Not much to say about that, except I think you could apply that to the whole series. There is a part, you've probably seen my Dark Tower friend Ash on some of these episodes. She pulled out something that I missed that I think is a good fit here. And this is where Roland has lost his fingers and he's trying to figure out how to reload his gun. King writes, "His right hand kept trying to do this job, insisted on forgetting its reduction in spite of the pain, and he found himself returning it to his knee again and again." So could you see how that's a metaphor for the cycle of forgetting in spite of the pain, returning again and again? King is brilliant. We talk about that word placental. And there's this idea of placental tearing when Detta Walker comes through the door on the beach. And we think, that's different because we didn't hear that with Eddie. We didn't hear that with Jack. What's going on there? And in the book club episode, we talk about this is the birth of Susanna and how at that moment they saw each other and the merging of the two began. And we point out example after example after example about how that begins immediately. That's a great fit. We know that there is a theme of motherhood and birth for this character up ahead. And so maybe a stretch, maybe not. Tell me what you think. Could the idea of placental tearing be connected to the idea of Mia and the foreshadowing of the birth of Mordred? Maybe. Okay, and then this one. This is where he gets into the mind of Jack Mort and he is going to stop the man in black. He thinks the man in black from pushing Jake. King writes, "But the rejection of brutish destiny had been the gunslinger's work all his life. It had been his ka, if you please. And so he came forward without even thinking, acting with reflexes so deep they had nearly become instincts." So this one's funny because we think about the rejection of brutish destiny and how this book is about, the series is about his brutish destiny. And he's not really rejecting that. And his ka to come forward without even thinking. I must go to the tower. And everyone's like, you don't have to go there. We saved the beams. He's in New York City. And they're like, you don't need to go there. And we're screaming it at Roland the second time we read this book. You don't need to go there. Don't go there. But his ka is to come forward without even thinking, acting with reflexes so deeply they had become nearly instinct. So I think that's something. So I'm just going to adjust my light a little bit here. Is that better? I don't know. On this theme, I like looking at the idea of his intuition, not as just me walking through this life the first time around and just knowing and being psychic, but rather I've done this before and a deeper part of me knows that I've done this before. And so this is not intuition. This is memory. This is memory of past lives or past cycles of me, past iterations. So here's some examples of that we could think of through that lens as a Tower Junkie. King writes, "Which way should he walk? He had come from the east. He could not walk west without the powers of a saint or savior. That left north and south. North. That was the answer his heart told. There was no question in it. North." The gunslinger began to walk. How does he know north? He just has an intuition that it's north, or he's done this 18 times before this moment. Here's one with Detta Walker, and I'm going to talk in a minute about how I think these are the quartet every time, and there's evidence of that. I can't prove it. Nobody can prove it, but we like to talk about it once we finish the series. It's a big topic on the Reddit, and I've got evidence for the idea that this is not our friend's first go-around. Detta, Odetta, Susanna, Eddie, Jake, etc. So Detta, when she awakes for the first time on the beach, has memories. She's remembering being tied to the wheelchair in that false memory, remember? And that didn't happen. She had been Odetta talking to Eddie and then fell asleep and then woke up as Detta Walker, having these false memories where she filled in everything through the Odetta lens. But then, within about 5 minutes of her waking up, she tries to kill Eddie and they catch her and she's writhing and thrashing, and they do tie her to the wheelchair. And in the book club episode, we can't talk about spoilers like this, but we did kind of say, oh, this is an example of thoughts becoming things, of our thoughts manifesting in physical reality, which is another theme that we've seen here in this book. But again, is that what is happening, or are they kind of remembering forward? Interesting question that I love to think about. I love to think about this in real life as well. When you have a psychic flash or something, and it's like, or deja vu. What are these things? And am I really psychic, or am I creating it in the moment? Because consciousness creates reality, so says some spiritual traditions. Or am I remembering the future because I've already lived it in some way? Fascinating to think about, especially in the context of this story. We have another example with Odetta, where the first time we meet her, she's in the limo and she's kind of zoned out, but on the radio, she hears the last gunslinger in America. And that idea just wakes her up internally. Why? Because she remembers doing this before? Because she knows the gunslinger? Because she is a gunslinger? Sure. Roland on the beach knows what's going on. So again, this intuition, but it's uncanny, where he knows, he tells Eddie, you've fallen in love with her. So Odetta comes through the door, changes to Odetta, meets Eddie, they talk, and Roland goes off and gets the water. And then when Roland comes back, he hasn't talked to Odetta at all. He doesn't know her. He's talking with Eddie about what's up, and he's like, I know you already love her. How could he possibly know that, not being privy to that conversation at all, except that he knows that those two love each other? It's Ka, and he's lived it, and they've all lived it before. Same thing with Roland knowing that Odetta really dislikes him. Again, they've had zero interaction. We pointed out how they don't talk to each other. He doesn't talk to either one of those women until pretty well into Detta being Detta. That's the first interaction he has with them. How does he know that she dislikes him? because he's done this before. That's the answer to all the questions I'm asking. Or is it? Tell me. But I think these are good examples of that. And let's talk about that falling in love immediately. Because Eddie did. Roland is correct. Roland's like, you already love her. And Eddie's like, yeah. How can that be? Are two people just meant for each other? Or is that how we encounter it? But really, it's this idea of past lives or current alternate dimensional versions of me being with someone else. And when I meet them, I say, aha, I love you already. It doesn't make any sense, but here we are. But had we been through 18 previous cycles of intense wonder and horror and deep love and trauma, would I not know that person the next time we did it, the 19th time I met them, and just fall in love immediately? I think that's kind of cool to think about. It's the same with Roland. And he's trying not to say in The Gunslinger that he loves this boy, but when he's being very real with himself in an odd moment of introspection, it's like the truth is he had loved the boy the moment that he met him, as he had Susan Delgado. And those two characters we remember being compared again and again, the lead up to Jake being a lot of thoughts of Susan, and the song that's connected with Susan is what he's singing with Jake. And he loves this boy immediately. And Jake loves him immediately as well. Everybody's falling in love with everybody else within 5 minutes of meeting each other. And Eddie, remember, thinks he could love Roland very quickly as well. He thinks somewhere into the cocaine hijack shenanigans, he's thinking of Roland and like, I like this guy, but you know what? I could love him like I love my brother. And we're a little taken aback by that because you have no idea who this invading presence in your mind is. Sure, he's trying to help you, but that's about all you know. What do you mean you could love him like your brother? Such fun to think about. So just example after example of that. And the same thing with Roland kind of trying to distance himself from Jake, like, I don't love him, this kind of thing. He does the same thing with Eddie, where we get this idea, and I think I have it later in the notes because it's a big deal. Don't put your heart near his hand. And Roland's like, yeah, no way, not gonna be attached to that man. And it's too late though. And we had examples already of the reason that thought came up for Roland is because he was like, thank God, and Eddie Dean. He's just so inherently like grateful and loving towards this person very quickly. And then that other part of Roland, that darker part of Roland is like, no, that's not how you do things. But same similarities between him and Eddie and him and Jake. So I think this is the same content each time. I think there's a whole bunch of examples of in this book how we see that could be true. And moving forward, we'll pull those things out from the other books because they're there. I remember that they're there. Okay, damnation. We brought that up. Let's really think about this in terms of the big scope of things. And I'm going to go back to that, don't make the mistake of putting your heart near his hand. So this is Roland on the beach, grappling, having that internal grapple with himself, much like he did in The Gunslinger about Jake. And it is the voice of his father, which we're going to talk about later in this episode. So King writes, don't make the mistake of putting your heart near his hand. Good advice. You did yourself ill to feel well of those to whom ill must eventually be done. Remember your duty, Roland. I've never forgotten it, he husked, as the stars shone pitilessly down. I can never say that word. And the waves grated on the shore, and the lobster monstrosities cried their idiot questions. I'm damned for my duty. And why should the damned turn aside? So that's the first kind of beat we get about damnation in this book. But remember, at the end of The Gunslinger, that word damnation is used. He pulled himself up on the rocky lip of damnation, whatever, right after Jake dies. So that theme had been established at that point, which I think that's the point, that changes everything. That's a different episode, a little bit. But here, he's already like, I already fucked up. I'm already damned. So I might as well just keep going and keep sacrificing everybody. What's the point? So that's where we kind of start the drawing of the three with that idea. At the end, though, we have a little bit of a change going on. Not big enough that the series is over. But Eddie and Roland, that conversation on the beach at the end in Final Shuffle, that's something. Read that whole thing over a few times because I don't have time to do it here. But Eddie's telling Roland the one thing his brother taught him that was worth anything, which is kind of amazing when we think about the character of Henry Dean and what we know of him. And you know, he's an asshole. He's not a good guy. He has no insight into himself. He's dragging Eddie down into the pits of Nar with him. And he doesn't seem super smart. But he does say a couple things here and there. He is the great sage and eminent junkie. And this is one of them. King writes, he taught me, if you kill what you love, you're damned. I am damned already, Roland said. But perhaps even the damned may be saved. Okay. So, not eternal damnation forever and ever. We have Roland shifting a little bit there and not saying why should the damned turn aside, but maybe, perhaps, there's some room for saving here. And the last words in this book, Eddie gently grasped Eddie's arm. So there's that love and the sweetness we're going to talk about during this episode. Even the damned love, he said. Where does this damnation come from ultimately, though? And where does it lead? And I think we know the answers to that, or we can spitball about it, because it doesn't start with Jake. In this series that King is sharing with us, in order of the books, that's where we see it first. But you have to wonder, even at that point, he decides that dropping Jake is more important than not getting to the tower. He has to get to the tower. So where did that damnation come from? I think it comes from the grapefruit. And we'll take a really good look at that when we get to book 4. Little teaser is that my idea here, it's not original. I'm sure other people think this too. The grapefruit is full of lies and misdirection and shows the worst. That's what the grapefruit does for everyone who looks into it. Why would that be different for Roland? And yet he looks into that ball and gets the vision of the tower, and he must go there, and this is his duty, and this is his destiny. Girl, come on. that ball is not telling you the truth. I think that's where the damnation comes from. And a little bit from his father. We're going to talk about that at the risk of everybody hating me. Okay. The very end of the drawing of the three ends with Roland ruminating on damnation. And he thinks to himself, damnation? Question mark. Salvation? Question mark. The Tower, period. In my mind, those three sentences are saying a lot, where he's questioning damnation at the end of this book. It is not a forgiven, I don't think that's a word, a real, definite, eternal thing. There's a question mark after it. Also, he's considering the idea of his own salvation. We would like a period there, but there is a question mark there. And of course, we know that the Tower is going to be his damnation. Also, it's his salvation, though, isn't it? So if we say damnation, yes. Salvation, yes. Because only by repeating the cycle can he break it. And landing in that spot right before he meets Jake every time, seemingly, that's what needs to happen. He needs to break that part right there. Just don't drop Jake, and then everything's different. But we need him to go get back to the desert to make a different choice. So it's damnation and salvation, I believe. Another question that comes up is just the idea that is he damned from that moment? Is there any possible way that he could save himself? And we see him trying to do that in book 7, where he tries to sacrifice himself for Jake. Totally selfless at that point. So we have these kind of selfish sacrifices going on at the early part of this series, but by the end, he just wants to save Jake, whom he sees as his son. Completely selfless act, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Ka intervenes, and his stiff knee, his stiff leg gives out on him, and Jake jumps out and is killed. So what? I don't know. That was the moment where salvation could have been possible, I believe. Because he would die in an act of complete and utter selflessness and not get to the Tower to repeat the cycle. But it wasn't to be. I think it was already written that he was damned. So when he's saying, I'm damned, he's kind of right. What do you guys think? Okay, moving on. Let's talk about how the people that he draws, the characters in this book, are mirrors to him. So Eddie, the prisoner, how is this like Roland? Roland is a prisoner of the cycle. Pretty big similarity there. Eddie is addicted to heroin. Roland is a Tower Junkie, as Eddie rightly points out. Eddie is a gunslinger. He has that deep steel, but he has a weakness in him as well, as does Roland. They both love deeply, but Eddie is much more ready to love than Roland. And it's because he needs to be needed. And that's a foreign idea to Roland. Roland just can't even fathom that idea. Odetta and Susanna, we spent so much time. I don't want to go too much into it. Just if you have ever wondered why King spends so much time on the backstory of Odetta and Detta, it's because he's trying to line up direct comparisons to Roland, even twice directly telling us Roland would have understood. And so we see a lot of these comparisons. One of them is to Odetta's father. Roland would have understood. That part of my life is gone. The world has moved on. I don't talk about that part of my life anymore, is what he says. Odetta's father. So we see tons of these comparisons. All are allegedly fighting against injustice, Detta, Odetta, and Roland. And cool to pick out that Odetta is the non-violent resistant side of that character. And we look at Roland and we're like, well, that doesn't exist. But it does. We see Roland furious at the end of the drawing of the three when the policemen, the gunslingers of our world, are using violence in the store, in the pharmacy. That was a place for nonviolence, and Roland knows it, and he's so mad that they're shooting in that situation. I think a better example is where he uses his communication skills, which we do not see Roland doing very often. So notable that when Detta is up screaming at night trying to keep them up, Roland doesn't get out his guns, he's not yelling, there's no violence. He's very quiet and calm and kneels down eye to eye with her. Very good bedside manner for this character that doesn't show us a lot of this. Listen, Odetta, he says, and makes that connection, we think, to Odetta inside. So there is nonviolent, resistant Roland in action. He does have that part of him. We just would like to see more of that. We see Roland being like Detta when we go through that whole sequence where she's gonna kill Eddie and then kill Roland to get away, to be free. It's crazy, and she's kind of the antagonist throughout this book, so we don't want that to happen. But had Roland been in her shoes, he would have done the same thing, and we would have been cheering for him. So that cunning part of Detta is there with Roland, and just doing what needs to be done in the present moment without thinking about the consequences. We're told that about Detta. Roland would have understood. And we see these comparisons between those characters, Odetta, Detta, Roland, and Roland's shadow side, and the merging of the love that's needed to merge the two halves of Susanna, and how successful that is, or we know that it is going forward. And we really look at that as a model for what Roland probably needs to do, is to reckon with both parts of himself, or all parts of himself, and see them for what they are, and extend love to those parts of himself, and then use all of it moving forward. I think Susanna continues to be a model for what Roland needs to do, even up to the very end, where she's the only one that survives the whole cycle. Why? She chooses empathy and love again and again throughout this series, and ultimately chooses to go through that door without, it's faith. Faith in love, hope in love is what she's choosing over the tower. That's what Roland needs to do, we think. So I just seeing that character emerge as the model, we'll watch that going forward. So much to say about Jack Mort. He is an awful person with zero empathy. He's the kind of person that would kill Jake. I think this is a mirror of Roland's shadow side. What if Roland gets to the tower as a monster? We keep being asked, it's all is lost. This is that monstrous side of him, because Jack Mort is a person that would kill Jake. Roland did fucking kill Jake. So there's a direct comparison right there. In the bigger scope of things, there's no answers here. But was Jack Mort ever a member of the quartet? Is Jack Mort a gunslinger? Is there anything there that could be redeemed So we see Detta Walker, and she's pretty awful, but she has this cunning side to her. She's very smart and observant and can plan things out, etc. Jack Mort is like that. He's awful. He's a bad person, I think, objectively. Is there a gunslinger in there that was meant to be drawn or was drawn during past cycles? And what would that look like? All of these characters get their second chance. This is a series about second chances and a series about redemption, offering Roland that second chance and third chance and 19th chance. But Eddie, Susanna, Callahan, we're giving them second chances. So I'm just so curious to know if and when or what Jack Mort's second chance would look like, and could he be redeemed as a gunslinger? The world may never know. If Roland didn't drop Jake, what would have been behind door number 3? That's another question I would like to know. Or would everything have been different? So just fun questions for those of us obsessed with the series. I don't know what that door would have opened onto. Maybe it would have opened onto the breakers, like where they needed to be, what they needed to fix, and they didn't have to slog through and re-find Jake and get Susanna pregnant and all these dominoes kind of falling down to get to Endworld and save the beams. Not the ka or fate of this cycle. Now here's something on that, in that regard, that I want to think about in the bigger sense of the quest. At the end of the book, Roland is about to throw himself as Jack Mort onto the tracks to hopefully merge Odetta and Detta. King writes, he could hear the train roaring toward the platform, could see its light. He had no way of knowing it was a train which kept the same route as the one which had run over Odetta, but all the same, he did know. In matters of the tower, fate became a thing as merciful as the lighter which had saved his life, and as painful as the fire the miracle had ignited. Like the wheels of the oncoming train, it followed a course, both logical and crushingly brutal, a course against which only steel and sweetness could stand. This is so big. That paragraph is so big. If we stop thinking about just the train and Jack Mort and Susanna and start thinking about matters of the tower, which King says directly, in matters of the tower. Fate, merciful and painful. And that reminds me of that thing we pulled out earlier, of the insisting on forgetting despite the pain. And then the mercy, the salvation, damnation, the mercy of getting another chance to do it. The pain of forgetting that everything that you need to know, perhaps. And then the idea of, like the wheels. Now remember, ka is a wheel, the whole thing is a wheel, like the wheels of the oncoming train. It followed a course. What? Roland's whole life, his whole cycle. It followed a course, both logical and crushingly brutal. A course against which only steel and sweetness could stand. There it is. What can stand? And we're told that idea of stand comes up in this book. Stephen King had written The Stand at this point. And so when we start seeing language about we will stand, yeah, it's a big idea. the ultimate stand against good and evil. What could stand? Only steel. And in this book, we're hearing about that deep steel, which we're going to hear about a lot more, and sweetness. And that is the thing that is lacking. And in our roundup episode of this book, we looked at this paragraph without any spoilers in terms of moving forward, what needs to happen. We know that's what needs to happen. We know that Roland needs to get in touch with that more feminine part of himself and not just be all the way over here on the spectrum of just cold, rational, guns are the answer, no room for heartfelt communication, expression of love, these kinds of things. And I love Roland, and we do get that out of him as we go towards the end of this book. But again, I think it's too late. I think he messed up. We need to have more sweetness for Jake. The horn, of course, is that hope that things could be different. There's a sweetness in his remembering to pick up that horn. The sweetness in his love for Cuthbert, which of course mirrors the love for Eddie, giving us the hope that things could be different. I think they can be. All right. Next thing, changing course entirely. Diana's dream. So we have Eddie and Roland are ready when the pizza truck's rolling up. Roland's standing ready inside of Eddie. And King writes, "Just another version of Diana's dream," Roland thought. What was in the box? The golden bowl or the biter snake? And just as she turns the key and puts her hands upon the lid, she hears her mother calling, "Wake up, Diana. It's time to milk." Okay, Eddie thought. Which is it going to be? The lady or the tiger? In both of these, and we talk about the lady and the tiger in a little more depth in the book club episode, but this is a story where we don't know what happens at the end. There is no resolution. We know a lot about the characters involved. We know that there are options going on. Behind one door is the lady that this man would marry, which the girl doesn't want him to marry, so she doesn't want him to pick that door because she nods to him which door to pick, but we don't know what she's decided, or the tiger, which is just going to kill him brutally. So anyway, there's no resolution though. We don't find out what happens in that story. And then a later story was written by the same author, and there's still a lack of resolution. So this idea of a involved story with multiple characters and a lot going on without a resolution to it, with an idea that like something happened here, but we don't quite know what. And then Diana's dream is without resolution. We don't know. What does she pick? Is it the wonderful thing or is it the awful thing? That is a metaphor for the whole damn series, isn't it? Okay, let's go to the idea of shuffling. So when we talked about the shuffle sections of this book, we gave a whole bunch of ideas about what that could mean, but we didn't talk about this one, which is a Tower Junkies only idea, which is the idea of shuffling the entire cycle, the shuffle of the cycles. How does that factor into the shuffling that's going on here? And we have some, I think, examples of that. So we're going to go back to that idea of the gunslinger knowing that he has to walk north. King writes, "You and your fucking tower," Eddie says, starts to turn away and then turns back, surprised as Roland's hand clamps on his arm like a manacle. They look into each other's eyes and Eddie says, all right. North. The gunslinger mouths, "North, I told you." Has he told him that? He thinks so, but it's lost in the shuffle. How do you know? Eddie screams at him in sudden frustration. He raises his fists as if to strike Roland, then lowers them. I just know. So why do you waste my time and energy asking me foolish questions? He wants to reply, but before he can, the cards shuffle. So that idea of lost in the shuffle. What shuffle? The shuffle of this book? Because when we look back, he did tell Eddie North. But I think Roland is remembering, because he's like, I think I said that. Did I say that? Yeah, like you've said that 18 times before. You did tell him north. You are thinking north. You know you have to go north because that's how this goes. So is it the shuffle of like, did I tell him that yet or not this time? I think that's a good example there. And then the idea of the shuffle of the larger cycle, kind of like we just talked about. Are we shuffling in Jack Mort or not this time? We'll never know. This time we shuffled him out of the deck in this cycle. Let's talk about 19. So we know that 19 features prominently in this series towards the last few books. And that's, of course, when the June 19th, 1999 car accident almost took Stephen King's life, and that impacted the way that he wrote these last three books. And so we see 19 popping up a lot, and of course Stephen King entering the story. This is before any of that happened, and there are a few 19s in here. I don't think, if you read the revised Gunslinger, it features prominently in there, but that was written afterwards. The original Gunslinger, I don't think, features any 19, but this book does 3 times, funnily enough, unless I missed one. It was August 19th, 1959, that Odetta Holmes lost her legs. This one's a little bit of a cheat, but we're on flight 901 with Eddie. So a rearranging of those numbers. Maybe a stretch, but I'm going to count it because it's my show. And then at the end of the book, there is a code 19 called on the police radio about Roland's shenanigans. So there you have it. Is King being psychic and predicting the idea of 19 in his life? Or is he remembering the future because this is not his first go around either? Here's a good one. Here's a fun one. Detta Walker is tying up Eddie, and she's like, don't be trying nothing funny, no funny games, no funny business, mister. Remember, Detta got the sight, is what she says, something like that. I know what you're going to do before you're going to do it. The sight. And I pulled that out in the book club, and we said, could there be another character? The touch, the sight. We had one potential gunslinger with the touch. Could this one have the sight? Is she just being funny? Is she just saying that? I know what you're going to do. Of course, we find out in the Wastelands that Susanna does, in fact, have a psychic ability, and it is the ability to see. She can see what things looked like. She can kind of imagine river crossing the way that it was, and she knows that it's oxen that were pulling the wagons, and she just knows what was going on. And she knows, she can see the drums and the killing, the hanging of the people. Like, she knows what's up, she can see it. So I think that's super cool that we get that little glimmer of that out of Detta Walker. All right, we're talking about Roland's fathers. Alexa, what time is it?
The time is 12:30 p.m.
Okay, I got to teach a class in 30 minutes, guys. So I need to wrap this up. But this is important. We go through this whole thing of comparing Roland and Odetta and Detta and Odetta's father to Roland. It's a lot that King shows us. And I'm not going to go into that here because I go into that until you probably want to die in the other episodes. But we do have this idea about Odetta's father is kind of, we decide like that's the origination of Detta Walker. He's the one that suppresses all of the communication about this darker stuff that was going on and what happened to him and being a black person in the early part of the 20th century and then during the civil rights movement. Like, he's not talking about any of it. He refuses to acknowledge it. He refuses to talk about it. And that repression of like, it's not okay, we're getting ahead, everything's fine. That's Odetta versus Detta. It's her father that is really the main cause of all of that. And at the end of the book, we're asked to look at that directly when Odetta and Detta are looking at each other. And it's like, Odetta, one thinks, and realizes who she is and when it happened. Detta, and realizes who she is and who did it. And then King tells us and talks about the idea of Jack Mort dropping a brick, and had not her father, in his pride, not gone and asked for another taxi ride, that never would have happened. King pulls Odetta's father into the who is responsible for this, names her father in that paragraph. And so I want us to kind of look at Roland. Again, we're being asked again and again to compare him to those characters and to what's going on there and what needs to happen. And Roland's father, who's responsible for this darker side of Roland, this part that's not communicating, that's detached from his emotions, that is not willing to consider things in a different light, in a lovely light. Sure, the grapefruit, okay, sure, Martin, but where does that come from? It comes from his father. And what do we know about Stephen Deschain in these books at this point? Did I pull it out? Yes, I did. I thought I did. Remember back in The Gunslinger where Roland is like tattling on hacks and he has this conversation with his father. That's an important conversation that tells us a lot about gunslingers and about their relationship in particular. And remember Stephen Deschain being like, "What? Like, so what? Why are you telling me this?" And Roland's like, "It was treason." And King writes, "His father waved a hand curtly. If you did it for something as cheap as a schoolbook idea, you did it unworthily. I would rather see all of Taunton poisoned." "I didn't!" The words jerked out of him violently. "I wanted to kill them, both of them. Liars, black liars, snakes. They..." "Go ahead." "They hurt me," he finished, defiant. "They changed something and it hurt. I wanted to kill them for it. I wanted to kill them right there." His father nodded. "That's crude, Roland, but not unworthy. Not moral either. But it is not your place to be moral. In fact," he peered at his son, "morals may always be beyond you. You are not quick like Cuthbert or Van A's boy. That's all right, though. It will make you formidable." The boy felt both pleased and troubled by this. Yeah, because it's troubling. His dad's like, "Oh, treason? Like, pff, that's no big deal. Like, that's a cheap schoolbook idea. We're not thinking about justice." We talk a lot about this fight against injustice. Well, right there, Stephen Deschain is dismissing that as a schoolbook idea. Treason is a schoolbook idea. And he says, "You're not supposed to be moral. We don't need you to be moral." He wants to hear about this wrongness, like this inner, they hurt me and I want to get revenge. And he's like, yeah, that's what we need to do here. It's very troubling when we really look closely at that relationship and what's going on there. And it's not just Steve and Jess Chain, it's all of the gunslingers raising their boys like this. It's problematic. And we see those problems in Gilead. The people are revolting against this. Like, how is this? Remember the face of your father. Okay, getting a phone call. Remember the face of your father. And I love that. And I love this series. I love this story. I love that idea. It's a very strong idea, but I want to really think about it in terms of Odetta remembering the face of her father. That caused a lot of problems for her. That caused a split in her psychically and led to all kinds of things coming up for her because she was remembering a father that was emotionally distant and was repressing important things that we don't want to think about because they're uncomfortable, perhaps. Steve and Jess Chain did the same thing. We know the treachery of Martin, like it's Martin's fault, it's Martin's fault. Just like we're saying, oh, it's Jack Mort. Obviously, Jack Mort is the cause. And we go, it's Stephen King's like, actually, it's her dad. Stephen King does that with Odetta. And we go, okay, it's Martin, the treachery of Martin. And it's like, Stephen King doesn't say this, but I want us to make the leap because a lot of times it's like Roland and Detta are just having the same thing going on. And so it's like, okay, Stephen Deschain, is he the real cause here? Or at least a part of the cause? And remembering the face of his father, is that doing Roland harm? More harm than good? The patriarchal society is fucking up. And unless you have a gun and are in the upper classes of this hierarchical society, your life is not great. That's what we see happening. It's a revolt. It's a revolution. And the leader of it is called the Good Man. And we don't know tons about that. We find out later, has that man been corrupted by the Man in Black? I think so. But was he always that way? And we'll talk about that fun, the good man is JFK in some other episode. So there's a lot going on there that kind of points to like, this society is not this wonderful Camelot at first glance. There's a lot of bad stuff going on here. And it's coming from the top down, from the patriarchy. Do we need to maybe forget the face of our father a little bit in order to achieve our quest of sweetness, of love? This out of balance thing. Remember the face of your mother. We don't hear that not once. Until King went back and revised the Gunslinger and inserted that Thomas Wolfe quote. And he says, naked and alone, we came into exile. In her dark womb, we did not know our mother's face. First time we're hearing about the face of the mother. And that's the quote that he uses to set up the series as a whole. And then after he was finished this series, he went back and wrote The Wind Through the Keyhole, which a lot of people are like, you don't have to read that. It's just a nice revisit with the quartet and it's a nice fairy tale. And I'm like, sure. Also, did you pick up on the theme of mothers in that book and how important it is to Roland's salvation? The ending of that book about forgiveness. Love for his mother and forgiveness are key to that whole thing. Anyway, we'll talk about that when we talk about it. But just to say, if we're looking at Susanna, Odetta, Detta, Susanna, as a mirror of Roland, which we are 100%, there's no doubt about that, and King is directly telling us to do that, when King says, what happened to make Odetta this split person who had this bad side, who's doing bad shit? Yeah, obviously Jack Mort and her dad. I think we're being asked to make that comparison and not just remember the face of our father. Yes, do that. But maybe he was kind of a fuck up and maybe he taught you things that weren't serving you ultimately. And maybe he is also responsible for putting you on the path to the Dark Tower, which is your destruction, really. Do you know what I'm saying, guys? Okay. This is unpopular because we all love you've forgotten the face of your father. I love it too. It's super cool. And I think when we're doing a deep dive, we must look very deeply at what's happening here. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And am I right? Am I wrong? Okay. I still have a few minutes, I think. This one I want to talk about. This mess up. Okay, we have this thing where Roland is at the Western Sea, like he walks west and he arrives at the beach. And we assume it's an ocean. We don't know that for a fact, but it's a huge body of water. And this is what King writes. He's walking north, remember? North, it's north. The landscape was monotonous and unpleasing. The sea, to his right, the mountains to his left. The gray shell-littered sand under his feet, under the feet of his cut-down boots. The sea to his right, the mountains to his left. Now, when you're facing north on the western coast, the sea is to your left and the mountains are to your right, not backwards. And so this has prompted a huge fight out there, which I love. I love fighting about these things, debating these things. And it's like, well, is there something weird going on here? Or did King just mess up? Because he's used to being on the East Coast. And he's used to, when he's facing north, having the sea on his right and the mountains on his left. Oh, he probably just messed up. A couple sentences later, though, listen to this. At last, around 3 o'clock of that long, delirious day, with his shadow beginning to grow long on his left, he reached it. Now, the sun sets in the west, and so if the sun is to my west, my shadow is going to be on my right, not on my left. That's weird. Is that another mistake so close to the first one, and nobody caught that? Or is King doing a thing here? Because he's brilliant, and he doesn't make mistakes, and he has editors he does make mistakes, but he has editors for when he makes mistakes to catch things like that. In book 3, we're told much more about this in terms of West is not true West anymore, but we're told that in The Gunslinger too. It's already a thing in King's mind. So we get more information about that in book 3 with the breakdown of the beams and space-time and size and everything stretching out and melting and just getting fucking weird. But we're told that in The Gunslinger as well. Something is changing. Time is becoming soft. You know, the tower is kind of the reason that this is all falling apart. And I have a bigger theory I have a lot of theories. That's why I have a show. One theory about as within, so without, and Roland's internal compass failing. His moral compass is failing. And he's doing things he's not supposed to be doing. And he's, as within, moral compass fail, external compass fail. And then that's why everything is getting weird. And like, it doesn't make any sense that he would be walking north and the ocean would be on his right. Unless we are talking about like a totally different dimension where not only space-time is breaking down, but perhaps, and I don't know how to do a visual of this, but I have some ideas like if we took 2 maps of the United States and we're talking about like taking one and like superimposing it on the other one, kind of like in an upside down. If you watch Stranger Things, you know, the upside down is this other dimension that is right next door to us, but things are just weird and different and kind of dark. And we're going towards the Dark Tower, remember? So if we use that idea and say, because lobsters are on the East Coast, not on the West Coast. They're on the East Coast. But if we flip that map and we said, now the West Coast is the East Coast, but we're in the upside down, it's making sense in my mind that you could be, if you're in the upside down version, you're walking north on a western beach and it is the sea is to your right and the mountains are to your left, because we've just completely flipped the whole idea of the thing. What do you think? That's my theory. I don't think this is a mistake. I have no proof of that, except that that weird shadow thing happens only a few sentences later. And that's it's weird. It's a little too weird, I think. Let me know what you think. Okay, so we got to wrap this up because I got to do other things with my life, unfortunately. And we get Roland again in this book. He's just being served the same dish. In book 1, we have Jake. I call him Susan 2.0. The setup to Jake, the lead up to Jake is all very similar to what's going on with Susan. Where even King's like, oh yeah, Careless Love. Here's that song. comparing Jake to an alabaster saint in these dreams with Susan. And then we do the same thing with Eddie. Like, he drops the boy. Now we're giving him another chance with Eddie. In spiritual traditions, this is a thing. Like, the idea that this book, I call this series, like the most spiritual treatise of the 20th century and 21st century, because it's the idea of loops. It's the idea of karma. It's the idea of reincarnation. It's the idea of just building up your internal light body of love, light, beauty. And Roland's mother says that in The Gunslinger. The only real beauty is order, love, and light. How do we get there? We got to do it inside first. You got to do it inside first, Roland. And you're given chance after chance after chance, cycle after cycle after cycle to get it right. Of course, he gets it wrong in this one. But again, by the end of this book, a little bit different in that we're saying out loud, I love you both. He doesn't say that to Jake. He never tells Jake that he loves him. He does say, I loved you, Jake, after he murdered him. So that's not nothing, but he never said it to Jake, poor little Jake. But he's saying it out loud now. That sweetness in Roland is emerging a little bit. The bud is beginning to bloom a little tiny bit. I'll still sacrifice you, but I love ya. Anyway, that's it for this Tower Junkies Only episode. What do you think? What did I miss? What did you pick up when you read this book for the second time, fifth time, 55th time? I love being here with you. I love doing this. This is all I want to do with my life. That's not the case right now on this cycle. Always hope for the future. Until we meet again, where we'll be talking about the wastelands. And thank you for being here, and thank you for liking and commenting and subscribing and all of those YouTube-y kind of things. Till we meet again, my Dark Tower Junkie friends, may you have long days and even more pleasant nights.